You know the car? Back to the Future made the DeLorean immortal. But the man behind it convinced Britain to commit £53 million to a factory in war-torn Belfast, approved in 7 weeks after Ireland refused the same deal. $200 million flowed through the venture. His personal exposure? $390,000. The difference vanished through a Panama shell, past a parliamentary inquiry, past 55 pounds of cocaine near LAX, and into an entrapment acquittal that settled nothing. That rise and fall, a fraud underwritten by salesmanship and scripture, traces back to a 17-year-old boy in Detroit who watched his father's addiction destroy everything and decided what needed fixing wasn't the foundation, just the face. Detroit, January 1925. John Zachary DeLorean entered a world defined by the intense heat of the Ford foundry and the quiet desperation of a fracturing home. His father, Zachary, was a Romanian immigrant who organized foundry workers by day and dissolved into violent, alcohol-fueled rages by night. This instability defined John's childhood. When the domestic pressure became unbearable, his mother, Catherine, would pack up the children and flee to relatives in Los Angeles, initiating a cycle of sudden relocations that disrupted his early education. Survival meant finding a way out. John secured a competitive spot at Cass Technical High School, Detroit's elite vocational pipeline. He learned to operate within rigid systems while maintaining a carefully guarded inner life. Around age 17, a physical shift occurred. DeLorean underwent corrective chin surgery to restructure his jawline. No hospital records or contemporary archives confirm the medical necessity, the exact date, or the circumstances of the procedure. To colleagues and biographers, DeLorean explained the operation as reconstructive surgery following a dramatic, heroic racing accident. Whether the crash ever occurred is secondary to the function the story served. The young DeLorean did not try to repair the broken dynamics of his family. Instead, he altered his physical appearance and manufactured a narrative of survival to explain the change. It was a highly effective method for managing vulnerability. Embellishment was not a clinical condition for him, but a professional tool designed to project strength where there was only instability. He learned early that the world responds to a convincing surface regardless of the structural damage underneath. This pattern of prioritizing the outward facade over the foundation became his default setting. He did not merely use deception to escape difficult situations, he used it to build an entirely new reality. As he stepped out of Detroit and into the competitive arena of automotive engineering, this habit of concealing flaws under a polished exterior ceased to be a teenage survival mechanism. It became his primary strategy for navigating the corporate world, setting up a lifetime of escalating high-stakes gambles. In 1956, John DeLorean entered General Motors and was assigned to Pontiac, a division then struggling with a reputation for dull, conservative cars. Here, his talent for projecting a powerful image found a real material outlet. The career that followed was not a myth. It was a sequence of legitimate, highly collaborative, and commercially massive achievements. His defining moment arrived in 1964 with the Pontiac GTO. While popular culture often credits DeLorean as the lone inventor of the muscle car, the breakthrough was a shared victory, built alongside engineers Bill Collins and Russ G. Together, they navigated a strict General Motors policy that banned mid-size cars from carrying engines larger than 330 cubic inches. DeLorean and his team found a loophole in the corporate rules. The restriction applied only to new base models, not to optional packages. By offering a massive 389 cubic inch V8 engine as an option on the intermediate Pontiac Tempest, they bypassed the restriction entirely. The maneuver demonstrated more than technical skill. It showed an ability to read and exploit institutional language. The GTO became a massive success, and the momentum carried DeLorean to the top of the industry. In 1965, at age 40, he became the youngest division head in General Motors history. He took over the flagship Chevrolet division in 1969, and by 1972 he was appointed group executive in charge of all North American car and truck operations. This was the peak of his corporate credibility. In these rooms, DeLorean established a genuine, powerful capability for persuasion. He could command boardrooms, sell radical concepts, and convince conservative executives to take massive risks. In Detroit, this talent was backed by real engineering knowledge and held in check by corporate committees. But this ability to project absolute certainty, to make others believe in a vision before the foundation was poured, would eventually become his most dangerous weapon once he left the safety of the corporate structure, and trusting people were asked to carry the exposure. In May 1973, at age 48, John DeLorean walked out of General Motors. While his public relations machine framed the departure as a heroic, principled stand against corporate conformity, contemporary UPI and industry reports revealed a more contentious reality. He was effectively forced out after a series of management clashes. DeLorean, however, chose to read his past corporate success not as the product of GM's massive infrastructure, but as proof of his own singular genius. He believed his reputation alone could anchor an independent global empire. By 1975, he had formed the DeLorean Motor Company, ready to convert that personal brand into a massive industrial project. He found his leverage in a territory hollowed out by economic despair and sectarian conflict. Northern Ireland in the late 1970s was a landscape defined by the violence of the Troubles, where unemployment in working-class neighborhoods often exceeded 50%. To the Northern Ireland office, a massive automobile plant promised more than jobs. It offered a high-profile political victory that might stabilize a volatile region. The resulting agreement was finalized in just 7 weeks. The British government committed £53 million, commonly simplified in project summaries as approximately $53 million, to a venture with almost no private capital. This extraordinary fast-tracked approval proceeded despite explicit written warnings from the British Treasury and civil servants who flagged severe failures in DeLorean's financial forecasting, warned of a complete lack of administrative control, and noted that the public was carrying almost all of the risk while the promoter carried none. To the south, the Republic of Ireland's Industrial Development Authority had already scrutinised the identical proposal and rejected it flatly, finding the business model structurally unsound. This frantic rush to secure funding, bypassing the slow, sober work of establishing a viable enterprise, brings an ancient warning into focus. Proverbs 28 verse 22 observes, "A man who hastens to be rich will not escape poverty." The pursuit of rapid expansion without a stable foundation is never a neutral act. It carries an inevitable cost, shifting the weight of the hazard to those least able to bear it. But political urgency ultimately overrode fiscal caution. With the signing of the contract, the British government authorised the creation of DeLorean's Empire, unknowingly setting the stage for its systematic dismantling. The transaction was complete, the public funds were committed, and the slow forensic gathering of evidence, the autopsy of a corporate collapse, began the moment the ink dried on the page. In late October 1978, bulldozers broke ground 6 miles southwest of Belfast on 72 acres of waterlogged marshland. The site, situated in the Dunmurry district, sat on a literal peat bog. Before any steel could rise, engineers had to stabilize the shifting, water-saturated earth. They drove thousands of massive concrete piles deep into the peat and installed a continuous network of drainage pumps to prevent the ground from swallowing the foundation. Designed by local architect Gerald Mooney and constructed by the building firms Farrans and McLaughlin and Harvey, an expansive state-of-the-art facility emerged from the mud, complete with a purpose-built test track wrapping around the perimeter. It was an ambitious, state-of-the-art facility covering 660,000 square feet of industrial space. While workers poured concrete in Belfast, a parallel structure was quietly assembled thousands of miles away. The financing architecture for this massive plant included an offshore shell corporation registered in Panama. At this stage, the entity functioned as an administrative conduit designed to manage international transactions and engineering contracts. While investigators would later scrutinize this offshore node as the alleged vehicle for a multi-million-dollar siphon, during the construction phase, it remained a silent, paper-thin element of the corporate blueprint, unnoticed by the builders on the ground. But on the ground in Dunmurry, the reality was solid, physical, and human. The factory sat directly between the highly segregated, warring communities of West Belfast. Each morning, hundreds of Catholic and Protestant workers walked from opposite sides of a sectarian divide, crossing a heavily fortified peace line to pass through the same gates. Inside the plant, the violence of the Troubles ceased to dictate the terms of daily survival. Men who lived in hostile neighborhoods stood side by side on the assembly line, learning the precision of high-tech manufacturing, earning equal family-supporting wages, and establishing a shared routine. For a brief season, the factory floor operated as a genuine oasis of cooperative labor. The cooperation was not a public relations construct, it was a daily, material practice of coordinated labor, where thousands of people proved they could build something complex together. The writer of Ecclesiastes observed a grievous evil under the sun, riches kept by their owner to his hurt, lost in a bad venture, leaving nothing in his hand. As he came, so shall he go, taking nothing from his toil. The ancient text frames the hazard of raising a grand structure on unstable earth, where the structural weakness precedes the ultimate collapse. By early 1981, the factory stood complete. The massive press machines were calibrated, the stainless steel panels were stacked, and the newly trained workforce was ready to begin production. The physical reality of the Dunmurry plant was undeniable. An achievement of labor, sweat, and engineering that existed despite the precarious financial machinery running silently in the background. In October 1981, the Dunmurry plant reached its operational peak, reporting 720 cars sold to dealers. On paper, the momentum looked unstoppable, but the reality in showrooms across America was far more fragile. A severe global recession had taken hold, and the $25,000 price tag, more than double the original estimate, pushed it out of reach for most buyers. Worse, early owners complained of fundamental quality control issues: stainless steel body panels that misaligned and door seals that leaked rainwater during basic use. Instead of slowing the assembly line to fix these defects, John DeLorean chose to accelerate. He ordered the factory to double production. It was a strategy designed to preserve the appearance of a booming enterprise, keeping the line moving while the market moved away. The factory's managing director issued an explicit warning, advising that the business could not sustain the massive financial shortfall of building cars without active buyers. He urged a temporary halt to repair the business and stabilize the product. But for DeLorean, the priority remained the preservation of momentum, regardless of the structural damage underneath. By January 1982, the illusion collapsed. Sales fell by half, plummeting to just 350 units. Over 4,000 unsold vehicles sat idle on the wet peatlands of Belfast, slowly gathering dust as interest charges and holding costs mounted. The line was moving, but the buyers were gone. With millions in public funds now locked in a field of unsold stainless steel, the hazard shifted from the assembly floor to the corporate books. How long could an empire survive when the cash ran out? And where would a desperate founder turn to find the next injection of capital? The true architecture of a venture is recorded in its ledger of risk. John DeLorean's personal financial contribution to his motor company amounted to approximately $390,000. Against this private stake, the total development cost of the Belfast plant and the vehicle program reached an estimated $200 million. In the forensics of corporate insolvencies, this extreme disparity between personal exposure and public funding is analysed as a highly calculated distribution of hazard rather than standalone proof of criminal intent. Yet the movement of capital soon began to trace a path away from the assembly lines. Roughly 4 months after DeLorean's first official company paycheck cleared, he acquired a $7 million duplex on Manhattan's Fifth Avenue, followed by a $3.5 million estate in New Jersey. At the center of the financial investigation that followed was a $17.5 million offshore transfer. Routed through a Panamanian shell corporation, these funds, primarily British taxpayer money, were directed to an entity known as Grand Prix Drivers. This entity was established through a connection with Lotus Cars founder Colin Chapman. While Lotus was compensated directly for its physical engineering work through standard billing channels, the $17.5 million sent offshore followed a different trajectory. Receivers later alleged that approximately half of this offshore capital was systematically diverted toward DeLorean's personal benefit, leaving the Belfast factory to operate on increasingly volatile margins. In analysing these events, a strict line must remain between the documented transaction history, the unresolved investigative claims of diversion, and the lack of a formal criminal conviction regarding these specific funds. By early 1982, the operational strain became terminal. Control was stripped from DeLorean as court-appointed receivers took over the company, freezing assets and halting the flow of capital. A subsequent British parliamentary inquiry returned a scathing verdict on the operation, detailing systemic mismanagement and calling for public restitution to the Treasury. While this parliamentary finding stood as a severe indictment of administrative neglect, it remained a civil and political judgment, distinct from any criminal trial. If authentic, DeLorean's own written defense from this period reflects the internal narrative of a builder under siege, claiming he was infected with the need to see his workers succeed. But this statement of paternal concern stands in stark relief against the verified accounts of capital flight. This expansion of personal estates and corporate ambitions, pursued even as the underlying enterprise fractured, evokes the warning of the rich fool in the Gospel of Luke. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. The ancient parable targets the illusion of security built on expanded storehouses that are ultimately empty. For DeLorean, the physical and financial storehouse collapsed almost overnight. His personal net worth, which had peaked at an estimated $28 million during the height of his corporate celebrity, withered to less than $1 million by the time the bankruptcy proceedings concluded. The assembly lines in Dunmurry had already ground to a halt when John DeLorean traveled to Los Angeles in October 1982. While the precise interval between the British government's final factory closure announcement and the events in California remains unresolved, the sequence of physical evidence is preserved on federal surveillance tape. Inside a hotel suite near LAX, FBI informants recorded the final negotiations. On camera, DeLorean sat near a suitcase containing 55 pounds of cocaine. He lifted a glass of champagne, celebrating a transaction estimated to be worth $24 million, and uttered the recorded phrase that would define his public trial, "It's better than gold." When federal agents entered the room, the handcuffs that secured his wrists represented the physical exposure of a public image rather than a legal validation of the broader financial allegations. The criminal indictment charged him with conspiracy to distribute cocaine, a case that culminated in August 1984. After 29 hours of deliberation, a federal jury acquitted DeLorean on all 8 counts on the grounds of government entrapment, ruling that federal agents had induced a financially desperate man into committing a crime he otherwise would not have organized. Yet this legal victory remained strictly confined to the criminal charge. The acquittal resolved that specific case, but it did not erase, resolve, or rewrite the separate civil registry of corporate insolvency, the missing offshore millions, or the systematic mismanagement documented by the British parliamentary inquiry. As the public spotlight focused on the courtroom drama in Los Angeles, the final cost of the venture settled on the ground in Belfast. The closure of the Dunmurry plant did not just end a business, it eliminated 2,500 steady jobs in working-class neighborhoods where secure employment was virtually non-existent. In the wreckage of the bankruptcy, the British government clawed back the remaining assets, including the workers' pension fund, leaving the employees with nothing to show for their labor. The grand promises of economic salvation dissolved into a quiet, lingering silence. In the end, the ultimate contrast of the DeLorean saga is not found in the legal verdicts, but in what remained. The car survived. The company didn't, and the 2,500 people who built it with their own hands mostly just went quiet and stayed quiet, while everyone else kept talking about the car. Today, that stainless steel silhouette remains a celebrated icon, yet its luster hides a persistent warning. We still routinely mistake charismatic conviction for character, valuing the grand facade over a solid foundation. In a world still captivated by those who hasten to be rich, the empty fields of Dunmurry are no longer history. They are a mirror. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.